I think he'd want you to have it now." Ethan looked at the gun, then at Briggs. Slowly, he reached out and took it. The weight of the weapon felt strange in his hand, heavier than he remembered. He strapped the belt around his waist and adjusted the holster against his hip. "Thank you," Ethan said again. Briggs nodded. "If you're really doing this, you're going to need supplies. I got some dried meat and hardtack back at my place, and a horse you can borrow." "I'll pay you back," Ethan said. 2 days later, Ethan rode into Silver Ridge. The town was small, barely more than a main street lined with weathered wooden buildings. A saloon sat on one corner, its doors swinging lazily in the breeze. Across from it stood a general store, a blacksmith shop, and a barber. At the far end of the street, a modest church steeple rose against the pale blue sky. And in the center of it all sat the bank, a squat brick building with iron bars on the windows and a heavy oak door. Ethan tied his horse to a post outside the saloon and stepped inside. The place was nearly empty. A bartender stood behind the counter, wiping down glasses with a rag that had seen better days. 2 old men sat at a corner table, playing cards in silence. And near the back, a man in a dusty traveling coat sat alone, nursing a whiskey. Ethan walked to the bar and nodded at the bartender. "Whiskey." The bartender poured him a glass without a word and slid it across the counter. Ethan drank it in one swallow, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "You new in town?" the bartender asked. "Passing through," Ethan said. "Smart," the bartender muttered. "Most folks are." Ethan glanced around the room. "Why's that?" The bartender leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You hear about the Corbin gang?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I've heard. Well, they're coming here. Day after tomorrow, maybe sooner. Everyone knows it. Half the town's already packed up and left. The rest are thinking about it." "What about the law?" Ethan asked. The bartender snorted. "Sheriff rode out 3 days ago. Said he wasn't dying for a town full of cowards. Can't say I blame him." Ethan frowned. "So you're just going to let them take the gold?" "What else can we do, the bartender said bitterly. "We're farmers and shopkeepers. We ain't fighters." Ethan didn't respond. He just stared down at his empty glass, his mind turning over the information like stones in a river. "You planning to stick around?" the bartender asked. Ethan looked up. "Maybe." The bartender studied him for a moment, then shook his head. "Then you're crazier than the rest of us." Ethan paid for his drink and left the saloon. Outside, the street was quiet, almost deserted. A few people hurried past, their heads down, their faces tight with fear. Ethan walked slowly toward the bank, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop, every alley. He wasn't here to save the town. He was here for one reason: revenge. But if he played this right, he might be able to do both. That night, Ethan found a room above the general store. The owner, a nervous man named Henry, had been reluctant to rent it out, but Ethan paid double the usual rate, and the man's fear gave way to greed. Ethan sat by the window, watching the street below. The town was silent except for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a sign swinging in the wind. He cleaned his revolver methodically, checking the cylinder, oiling the mechanism, ensuring every part was ready. He thought about his parents, about the ranch, about the life he'd lost, and he thought about the men who'd taken it from him. Sam Butcher, Clay Butcher, Logan Pike, Victor Corbin. 4 names. 4 graves he intended to dig. Ethan set the gun on the table beside him and leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. His mind drifted back to the war, to the prison camp, to the things he'd seen and done to survive. He'd promised himself he'd never kill again, never become the kind of man who took life without feeling the weight of it. But that promise felt hollow now, empty. Because the men who killed his family weren't human, they were monsters. And monsters didn't deserve mercy. Ethan closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. What? The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. He dressed quickly, strapped on his gun belt, and headed downstairs. The general store was still closed, but Henry was awake, sweeping the floor with a nervous energy that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "Morning," Ethan said. Henry jumped, nearly dropping the broom. "Jesus, you scared me." "Sorry," Ethan said. "I need some supplies. Ammunition. A rifle if you've got one." Henry hesitated. You planning to fight? Maybe, Ethan said. Henry shook his head. You're wasting your time. Corbin's gonna roll through here like a wildfire. Ain't nothing gonna stop him. Maybe not, Ethan said. But I'm gonna try. Henry stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. All right, I got a Winchester in the back and a box of cartridges, but I'm charging you extra for the risk. Fair enough, Ethan said. Henry disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later with the rifle and ammunition. Ethan paid him, loaded the Winchester, and slung it over his shoulder. You got a death wish? Henry asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Something like that. He left the store and walked toward the edge of town, where the land opened up into rolling hills and sparse trees. He needed to scout the area, to understand the terrain, to figure out where Corbin's gang would approach from. As he walked, he noticed something strange, a man standing near the church, watching him. The man was tall and thin, dressed in a long black coat and a flat-brimmed hat. His face was shadowed, but Ethan could feel the weight of his gaze. Ethan stopped and turned toward him. Something I can help you with? The man didn't respond. He just stood there, silent and unmoving, like a statue. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun, but before he could say anything else, the man turned and walked away, disappearing around the side of the church. Ethan frowned. Something about that man felt wrong, off. But he didn't have time to worry about it now. He had work to do. He spent the rest of the morning walking the perimeter of the town, studying the hills, the roads, the places where a gang could hide or ambush. By noon, he had a rough plan forming in his mind, a plan that would require the help of the townspeople. The question was, would they help him? Ethan returned to the main street and headed toward the saloon. If he was going to convince anyone to stand and fight, he'd have to start with the people who had the most to lose. Inside the saloon, he found the mayor, a portly man named Thomas Green, sitting at a table with the barber and the gravedigger. They were drinking heavily, their faces flushed with fear and alcohol. Ethan walked over and sat down uninvited. Who the hell are you? Green demanded. Name's Ethan Hale, Ethan said calmly. And I'm here to help you save your town. Green laughed bitterly. Save it? There's nothing to save. Corbin's coming, and when he does, this place is finished. Not if we fight, Ethan said. The barber, a wiry man named Pete, shook his head. Fight? With what? We got no guns, no soldiers, no law. We're sitting ducks. You've got me, Ethan said. The three men stared at him, then burst into laughter. You? Green said, still chuckling. One man against Corbin's whole gang? You're insane. Maybe, Ethan said, but I've got something you don't. What's that? Pete asked. A reason to fight, Ethan said. The laughter died. The three men exchanged uneasy glances. What's your reason? Green asked quietly. Ethan's expression darkened. Corbin's gang killed my family, burned my home to the ground. I'm not here to save your town. I'm here to kill every last one of them. But if you help me, I'll make sure they don't take your gold or your lives. The gravedigger, a somber man named Jacob, leaned forward. What's your plan? Ethan smiled grimly. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Green frowned. You're going to let them take the gold? No, Ethan said. I'm going to make them think I'm helping them take it, and then I'm going to kill them all. The three men sat in stunned silence. You're crazy, Pete finally said. Probably, Ethan agreed, but it's the only way. Are you in? Green looked at Pete, then at Jacob. Slowly, reluctantly, they nodded. All right, Green said, what do you need us to do? Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and steady. First, we're going to need dynamite. The gravedigger knew where to find dynamite. Jacob led Ethan through the back alleys of Silver Ridge, past the shuttered windows and barred doors, until they reached a small shed behind the abandoned mining office. The building had been closed for years, ever since the silver veins ran dry and the prospectors moved on to richer ground. But the equipment remained, picks, shovels, and crates of blasting powder that had been forgotten in the rush to leave. Jacob pushed open the shed door with a creak that echoed in the stillness. Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light that cut through the darkness. Inside, stacked against the far wall, were a dozen wooden crates marked with faded stencils. Danger. Explosives. How much you need? Jacob asked, his voice low and cautious. Ethan studied the crates, calculating. All of it. Jacob's eyebrows rose. All of it? You planning to blow up the whole damn town? Just the parts where Corbin's men will be standing, Ethan said. Jacob shook his head but didn't argue. Together they began hauling the crates out of the shed, loading them onto a small cart that Jacob had brought along. The work was slow and dangerous. The dynamite was old, the sticks slick with nitroglycerin sweat that had leached through the paper wrapping. One wrong move, one hard jolt, and they'd both be scattered across the landscape in pieces too small to bury. But Ethan worked with steady hands, his face calm, his movements deliberate. He'd handled explosives before, during the war. He knew the risks, and compared to what he was about to face, a little unstable dynamite seemed almost tame. When the last crate was loaded, Jacob wiped his brow and looked at Ethan with something between respect and fear. "You really think this'll work?" "It has to," Ethan said simply. They rolled the cart back toward the center of town, moving slowly to avoid jarring the cargo. The streets were still mostly empty, though a few faces appeared in windows, watching with hollow eyes as the two men passed. Fear had hollowed out Silver Ridge, turned it into a ghost town even before the outlaws arrived. Ethan didn't blame them for being afraid. Fear was a rational response to men like Victor Corbin. But fear alone wouldn't save them. Action would. And if they wouldn't act, Ethan would do it for them. They stored the dynamite in the basement of the general store, where Henry reluctantly agreed to let them work. The storekeeper's hands trembled as he watched them carry the crates down the narrow stairs, his face pale as milk. "If this goes wrong," Henry muttered, "we're all dead." "If this goes wrong, we were dead anyway," Ethan replied. Henry didn't have an answer for that. Once the dynamite was secured, Ethan called a meeting in the back room of the saloon. Word had spread quickly. The stranger who'd arrived in town was planning something. Whether it was salvation or suicide remained to be seen, but curiosity brought a small crowd. Mayor Green was there, along with Pete the barber and Jacob. A few other men trickled in, shopkeepers, a blacksmith, a couple of ranch hands who'd come into town for supplies and gotten trapped by the news of Corbin's approach. Ethan stood at the front of the room, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the assembled faces. There were maybe a dozen men in total. Not an army, not even close, but it would have to be enough. "Thank you for coming," Ethan began. His voice was quiet but carried weight, the kind of weight that came from a man who'd already made peace with death. "I know most of you want to leave, and I don't blame you. Victor Corbin's gang has been terrorizing this territory for years. They've killed more men than any of us can count. Running makes sense." He paused, letting the words settle. "But here's the truth. Even if you run, they'll catch you. Corbin doesn't leave witnesses. He doesn't leave survivors. If you run, you die tired. If you stay and do nothing, you die in your beds. Either way, you die." The room was silent. A few men shifted uncomfortably, their eyes dropping to the floor. "But," Ethan continued, "if you stay and fight, you've got a chance. A small one, maybe, but a chance." "What kind of chance?" Pete asked, his voice skeptical. Ethan pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket and unfolded it on the table. It was a rough sketch of the town, hastily drawn but clear enough. He pointed to the bank in the center. "Corbin's coming for the gold. That's all he cares about. He doesn't want to fight. He wants an easy score, so we're going to give him one." Mayor Green frowned. "You're going to let him take the gold?" "No," Ethan said. "I'm going to make him think I'm helping him take it." The men exchanged confused glances. Ethan tapped the map. "Corbin's smart. He knows this town is scared. He knows most of you have already run. So when I approach him and offer to help, he'll believe me. Why wouldn't he? I'm just another greedy drifter looking for a cut of the money." "And then what?" Jacob asked. Ethan's expression hardened. "Then I lead his men into a trap. We plant dynamite at key points around the bank. Here, here, and here." He pointed to spots on the map. "When they gather to break into the vault, we light the fuses. The explosions will take out most of them in the first few seconds. The ones who survive, we pick off with rifles from the rooftops." Pete shook his head. "That's insane. You really think Corbin's going to fall for that?" "He will if I make it convincing," Ethan said. "And what if he doesn't?" Pete pressed. "What if he sees through you? What if he kills you before you even get close?" Ethan met his eyes. "Then you blow the dynamite anyway, and you hope it's enough." The room fell silent again. The weight of what Ethan was proposing settled over them like a shroud. This wasn't just a plan, it was a suicide mission wrapped in a thin layer of hope. Finally, the blacksmith, a bear of a man named Tom, spoke up. "Why should we trust you? We don't know you. For all we know, you could be working with Corbin already." Ethan didn't flinch. "You shouldn't trust me. You should trust the fact that I've got nothing to lose. Corbin's gang killed my family, burned my home. I'm not here for the gold. I'm here for blood. And if helping you gets me that, then we're on the same side." Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'm in." One by one, the other men agreed. Some reluctantly, some with grim determination, but all of them understood the same truth. This was their only chance. "Good," Ethan said. "We've got 1 day to prepare, maybe less. Get your families out of town if you can. Gather every rifle, every box of ammunition you can find. And don't tell anyone outside this room what we're planning. If word gets back to Corbin, we're finished." The meeting broke up, and the men dispersed to their tasks. Ethan stayed behind, staring down at the map, his mind running through every possible outcome. There were 1,000 ways this could go wrong, and only one way it could go right. He folded the map and tucked it back into his coat, then stepped outside into the afternoon sun. The street was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of dust and distant rain. Ethan walked toward the edge of town, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver, his eyes scanning the horizon. That's when he saw the rider, a lone man on horseback approaching from the north. He rode slowly, casually, as if he had all the time in the world. As he drew closer, Ethan could make out his features: lean face, hard eyes, a scar running down the left side of his jaw. He wore a black duster and a wide-brimmed hat, and a pair of revolvers hung low on his hips. Logan Pike. Ethan's blood went cold. He recognized the man from Briggs's description, one of the killers, one of the men who'd murdered his parents. And now he was here, riding into Silver Ridge like he owned the place. Pike pulled his horse to a stop in the middle of the street and dismounted with the easy confidence of a man who'd never lost a gunfight. He looked around, taking in the empty storefronts, the shuttered windows, the ghost town silence. Then his eyes landed on Ethan. For a moment, neither man moved. They stood 50 feet apart, the street stretching between them like a battlefield. Ethan's hand hovered near his gun, his muscles coiled tight. Pike smiled, a slow, cruel smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You lost, friend," Pike called out. Ethan didn't respond. Pike took a few steps forward, his boots clicking against the hard-packed dirt. "This town's about to have some trouble. Might want to move along before you get caught in the middle of it." "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said quietly. Pike's smile widened. "Brave man, or stupid. Hard to tell the difference sometimes." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "What are you doing here?" "Scouting," Pike said with a shrug. "Boss wants to know what kind of resistance we're looking at. Turns out, not much." He gestured around at the empty street. "Most folks ran already. Smart of them." "And if they hadn't?" Ethan asked. Pike's expression darkened. "Then we'd have made them wish they had." Ethan felt the anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp, but he forced it down. He couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. Not when Pike was standing right in front of him, within arm's reach of justice. But killing Pike now would ruin everything. It would alert Corbin, scatter the gang, and destroy any chance Ethan had of finishing what he'd started. He needed Pike alive. For now. "You planning to stand there all day, or you got business here?" Pike asked, his tone mocking. Ethan forced himself to relax, to let the tension drain from his shoulders. "Just passing through. Heard there was work in the area." Pike studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of work?" "The kind that pays well and doesn't ask questions," Ethan said. Pike's smile returned. "You looking to join up with Corbin's crew?" Ethan shrugged. "Depends on what he's offering." Pike laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Most men piss themselves when they hear Corbin's name. You're either very brave or very stupid." "Maybe both," Ethan said. Pike considered this, then nodded. "All right, I'll bring you in. But if you cross us, I'll gut you myself. Understand?" "Understood," Ethan said. Pike turned and walked back to his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. Corbin's camped about 5 miles north of here. Follow me. Ethan grabbed his own horse from the hitching post and mounted up. As they rode out of town together, he felt the weight of every eye on him, the townspeople watching from their windows, wondering if he'd just betrayed them, wondering if he was leading the wolves straight to their door. But Ethan didn't look back. He kept his eyes forward, his face blank, his mind focused on the task ahead. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. One wrong word, one moment of hesitation, and Corbin would see through him. And if that happened, Ethan would be dead before he could draw his gun. But he'd come too far to turn back now. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sound the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the creak of saddle leather. Pike seemed relaxed, almost bored, as if bringing a stranger to meet a notorious outlaw was just another Tuesday. Finally, Pike spoke. "What's your name?" "Hale," Ethan said. "Ethan Hale." Pike glanced at him sideways. "That name's supposed to mean something?" "Not to you," Ethan said. Pike grunted. "Fair enough. Just so you know, Corbin don't trust easy. You're going to have to prove yourself." "How?" Ethan asked. "We'll see," Pike said with a grin. "He's got his ways." They rode on, climbing into the low hills north of Silver Ridge. The land here was rough and dry, dotted with scrub brush and twisted juniper trees. A good place to hide, Ethan thought. A good place to plan a raid. As they crested a ridge, Ethan saw the camp spread out below, a collection of tents and makeshift shelters scattered around a central fire pit. Men moved about, tending horses, cleaning weapons, playing cards in the shade. Ethan counted at least 30, maybe more. All of them armed. All of them hard-looking, the kind of men who'd killed before and would kill again without a second thought. And at the center of it all, standing by the fire with his arms crossed, was Victor Corbin. He was taller than Ethan had imagined, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with a thick beard and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a long coat despite the heat, and a revolver hung at his side in a well-worn holster. Even from a distance, Ethan could feel the man's presence, a kind of gravity that pulled everything toward him, bent it to his will. Pike led Ethan down into the camp. Men stopped what they were doing to watch, their faces curious, suspicious. Ethan kept his expression neutral, his hands visible, his posture relaxed. He couldn't afford to look like a threat. Not yet. They stopped in front of Corbin. The outlaw leader looked Ethan up and down, taking his measure with cold, calculating eyes. "Who's this?" Corbin asked, his voice deep and rough. "Found him in Silver Ridge," Pike said. "Says he's looking for work." Corbin's gaze didn't waver. "That's so." "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "You got a name?" "Ethan Hale." Corbin nodded slowly. "And what makes you think I need another man?" Ethan met his eyes without flinching. "I know you're planning to hit the bank in Silver Ridge. I know there's 200,000 in gold sitting in that vault. And I know the town's half empty and scared to death. You don't need me. But I can make the job easier." Corbin's eyebrows rose slightly. "How's that?" "I've been in town for 2 days," Ethan said. "I know the layout. I know where the guards are, or aren't. I know which buildings have good sight lines and which ones don't. And more importantly, I know the people. They're terrified. They won't fight." Corbin considered this. "And why would you help us?" "Because I want to cut," Ethan said bluntly. "I don't care about the town. I don't care about the people. I care about getting paid." For a long moment, Corbin said nothing. He just stared at Ethan, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I like you," Corbin said. "You're honest. Or at least you're good at pretending to be. Either way, I can work with that." He turned to Pike. "What do you think?" Pike shrugged. "He's got guts. Could be useful. Could be a liability. Hard to say." Corbin nodded. "All right, Hale, here's the deal. You help us take that bank, you get 5% of the take. That's $10,000. More money than you'd make in 10 years of honest work." "Sounds fair," Ethan said. "But," Corbin continued, his voice hardening, "if you cross me, if you so much as think about double-crossing me, I'll make you beg for death before I give it to you. Understand?" "Understood," Ethan said. Corbin extended his hand. Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment. Shaking hands with the man who'd ordered his parents' deaths felt like betrayal on a level he couldn't quite name. But he forced himself to reach out, to grip Corbin's hand firmly, to look him in the eye and lie with every fiber of his being. "Welcome to the crew," Corbin said. The men around the camp relaxed slightly, returning to their tasks. Ethan followed Corbin and Pike to the fire, where they sat on rough-hewn logs and talked strategy. "We move tomorrow night," Corbin said, tracing a line in the dirt with a stick. "Hit the bank just after midnight, when everyone's asleep. In and out in 20 minutes, no mess, no fuss." "What about the vault?" Pike asked. "We blow it," Corbin said. "I've got enough dynamite to crack it open. Once we're in, we load the gold onto wagons and head north. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll be halfway to the Canadian border." Ethan listened carefully, memorizing every detail. "What about resistance?" Corbin snorted. "There won't be any. The sheriff ran off days ago. The townspeople are too scared to lift a finger. It's going to be the easiest job we've ever pulled." "Maybe," Ethan said carefully, "but it wouldn't hurt to have a backup plan." Corbin looked at him with interest. "What kind of backup plan?" Ethan hesitated, as if thinking it through. "What if you sent me back into town tonight? I could scout the bank, make sure there are no surprises, maybe even disable any locks or alarms they've got. That way, when you ride in, it's a guaranteed clean sweep." Corbin considered this. "And why would you do that?" "Because I want my $10,000, Ethan said, "and I want to make sure nothing goes wrong." Corbin smiled. "Smart. All right, you go back tonight, but Pike goes with you, just to make sure you don't get any funny ideas." Ethan nodded. "Fine by me." As the sun began to set, the camp settled into an uneasy rhythm. Men cooked beans and bacon over open fires, passed around bottles of whiskey, and talked in low voices about the raid to come. Ethan sat apart from them, his back against a boulder, his mind racing. He'd gotten inside. He'd earned Corbin's trust, at least enough to get close. But now came the hard part, convincing them to walk straight into a trap without raising suspicion. Pike approached him as darkness fell, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. "Here," he said, offering it to Ethan. Ethan took it with a nod of thanks. The coffee was bitter and strong, the kind that kept a man awake on long nights. "You ever kill anyone?" Pike asked suddenly. Ethan looked up at him. "Yes." "In the war?" "Yes." Pike nodded. "Good. That means you won't freeze when the time comes." Ethan didn't respond. He just sipped his coffee and stared into the fire. Pike sat down beside him. "I'll tell you something, Hale. Corbin's a hard man, but he's fair. You do right by him, he'll do right by you. You cross him." Pike drew a finger across his throat. "Well, you've been warned." "I don't plan on crossing him," Ethan said. "Good," Pike said. He stood and stretched. "Get some sleep. We ride out in a few hours." Ethan watched him walk away, then set the coffee aside. Sleep wasn't an option, not with his mind churning through 1,000 variables, 1,000 ways this could go wrong. But he'd come this far, and he wasn't turning back now. When midnight came, Ethan and Pike saddled their horses and rode south toward Silver Ridge. The night was clear, the moon a thin crescent that offered just enough light to see by. They moved slowly, carefully, avoiding the main road and sticking to the shadows. As they approached the edge of town, Pike pulled his horse to a stop. "All right, here's how this works. You go in first. I'll wait here and watch. You've got 30 minutes to check out the bank and report back. If you're not back by then, I come looking for you. And if I find you doing anything you shouldn't be..." He tapped the gun at his hip. "Understood," Ethan said. He dismounted and walked into town on foot, his boots silent on the packed earth. The streets were empty, the buildings dark. But Ethan knew the townspeople were watching, hiding behind curtains and closed doors, waiting to see what he would do. He made his way to the bank, moving quickly but carefully. The front door was locked, as expected. He circled around to the back and found a window he could pry open. Inside, the bank was pitch black. Ethan struck a match and held it up, illuminating the interior. The vault sat at the far end of the room, a massive iron door with a combination lock. Ethan studied it for a moment, then moved to the back office where he knew the mayor kept the keys to the side entrance. He found them hanging on a peg and pocketed them. Then he set to work on the real task, marking the spots where the dynamite would be placed. He moved quickly, using chalk to make small marks on the floor and walls, places that would be invisible in the dark but clear enough for the townspeople to find when the time came. He marked 3 spots in total, forming a triangle around the area where Corbin's men would gather when they tried to break into the vault. When he was finished, he slipped back out through the window and made his way to the general store. Henry was waiting in the basement, his face pale with worry. "Did it work?" Henry whispered. "So far," Ethan said. "I've marked the spots. You and Jacob need to plant the dynamite tomorrow, before Corbin arrives. Make sure the fuses are long enough to give you time to get clear." "What about you?" Henry asked. "I'll be with Corbin's men," Ethan said. "When the time comes, I'll make sure they're all in position. Then I'll give the signal." "What signal?" Ethan pulled a red bandana from his pocket. "When you see me wave this, light the fuses and run. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. Just run." Henry took the bandana with trembling hands. "What if something goes wrong?" "Then we're all dead anyway," Ethan said grimly. "But at least we'll die fighting." He left Henry and returned to where Pike was waiting. The gunfighter looked bored, leaning against his horse with his arms crossed. "Well?" Pike asked. "It's perfect," Ethan said. "No guards, no locks worth worrying about. The vault's going to take some work, but nothing we can't handle." Pike grinned. "Good. Corbin's going to be pleased." They rode back to camp, arriving just before dawn. Corbin was already awake, standing by the fire and drinking coffee from a battered tin cup. "Report," he said as Ethan dismounted. "The bank's wide open," Ethan said. "No resistance, no surprises. You could walk in and take the gold without firing a shot." Corbin's smile was cold and satisfied. "Excellent. We ride at dusk tomorrow. By this time the day after, we'll all be rich men." The camp erupted in cheers, men clapping each other on the back and passing around bottles of whiskey. Ethan forced himself to smile, to join in the celebration, even as his stomach twisted with disgust. These men had no idea they were riding to their deaths, and Ethan intended to keep it that way. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Ethan spent most of it at the Outlaw camp, watching the men prepare for the raid with a mixture of anticipation and bloodlust that made his skin crawl. They cleaned their weapons with meticulous care, sharpened knives on whetstones, checked ammunition counts, and talked in low voices about what they'd do with their share of the gold. Some planned to head west to California, others north to Canada, where the law couldn't reach them. A few talked about buying ranches, settling down, living like respectable men. Ethan listened to it all with a face carved from stone, giving nothing away. Inside, his hatred burned hotter with every word, every laugh, every casual mention of the violence they'd committed in the past. These men didn't see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as smart, as men who'd figured out how to take what they wanted in a world that didn't give anything for free. Logan Pike was the worst of them. He sat by the fire cleaning his revolvers, telling stories about past raids with the casual tone of a man recounting a hunting trip. He talked about the ranchers they'd killed, the women they'd terrorized, the towns they'd burned, all with a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. At one point, he mentioned a raid on a ranch in Montana territory, a place where an old couple had tried to fight back. "The old man came out with a shotgun," Pike said, his hands moving methodically over the gun barrel with an oiled rag. "Brave bastard, I'll give him that. But stupid. Shot at us before we even got close. Missed by a mile." He laughed. "So we took our time with him, made him watch while we—" "That's enough," Corbin interrupted, his voice sharp. Pike looked up, surprised. "What? I said that's enough," Corbin repeated. He glanced at Ethan, his eyes calculating. "Some of the men don't need to hear every detail." Pike shrugged and went back to cleaning his guns, but Ethan's blood had turned to ice. He knew exactly which ranch Pike had been talking about. He knew exactly who that old couple had been. His parents. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun, his fingers twitching with the urge to draw and fire, to put a bullet between Pike's eyes right then and there. But Corbin was watching him closely, reading his face, looking for any sign of weakness or deception. Ethan forced himself to breathe, forced his hand away from the weapon, forced his expression back to neutral. "You all right, Hale?" Corbin asked. "Fine," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Just thinking about tomorrow." Corbin nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on Ethan for a moment longer than necessary. Then he stood and addressed the camp. "Everyone get some rest. We ride at dusk. And remember, this is a clean job. We get in, we get the gold, we get out. No unnecessary killing, no burning buildings, no loose ends. Understood? The men mumbled their agreement, though Ethan doubted many of them would follow those orders once the shooting started. Men like these didn't do clean. They did chaos. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found a spot away from the main camp and sat with his back against a boulder, staring out at the horizon. His mind was already in Silver Ridge, running through the plan step by step, looking for flaws, for ways it could fall apart. The townspeople would have planted the dynamite by now. Mayor Green, Jacob, Pete, Tom the blacksmith, they'd all been given specific instructions. 3 charges placed in a triangle around the spot where the vault sat, long fuses that could be lit from a safe distance, and rifles positioned on the rooftops, manned by anyone in town who could shoot straight. It was a good plan, a solid plan, but it required perfect timing and perfect execution. If Ethan gave the signal too early, Corbin's men would scatter before the explosions. Too late, and Ethan himself would be caught in the blast. And if the townspeople panicked, if they lit the fuses before everyone was in position, the whole thing would collapse into a bloodbath with no winners. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to quiet his mind, but sleep wouldn't come. His body was too tense, his thoughts too sharp. So he sat there in the fading light, waiting for the sun to set, waiting for the moment when everything he'd worked for would either succeed or fail spectacularly. As dusk approached, the camp came alive with activity. Men saddled horses, loaded ammunition, checked cinches and stirrups. Corbin moved among them like a general inspecting his troops, offering words of encouragement, making last-minute adjustments to the plan. Finally, he called everyone together. "Listen up," Corbin said, his voice carrying across the camp. "This is what we've been waiting for. 200,000 in gold, just sitting there waiting to be taken. We do this right, we'll all be set for life. We do this wrong, we'll all be dead. So I want everyone focused, I want everyone sharp, and I want everyone to follow orders exactly as I give them. No improvising, no heroics. We work as a team, or we don't work at all." The men nodded, their faces grim and determined. Corbin turned to Ethan. "Hale, you're riding with me and Pike. You'll lead us to the bank and show us the best way in. After that, you stay close and do exactly what I tell you. Clear?" "Clear," Ethan said. They mounted up and rode south toward Silver Ridge, a column of 30 armed men moving through the twilight like a pack of wolves. Ethan rode near the front, flanked by Corbin on one side and Pike on the other. The weight of their attention pressed on him like a physical force. The ride took just over an hour. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the town, Corbin raised his hand and the column halted. Below them, Silver Ridge sat quiet and dark, barely a light visible in any window. "Looks deserted," Pike observed. "It is," Ethan said. "Most people left days ago. The ones who stayed are hiding." Corbin studied the town through a pair of field glasses, scanning the buildings, the streets, the bank at the center. "I don't see any guards, no lookouts, nothing." "I told you," Ethan said. "They're too scared to fight." Corbin lowered the glasses and smiled. "Then this is going to be easier than I thought." He turned in his saddle to address the men behind him. "We're going in quiet. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. Half of you will secure the perimeter. Watch the roads. Make sure nobody rides for help. The other half comes with me to the bank. We blow the vault, load the gold, and we're gone before anyone even knows we were here." The men split into 2 groups. Corbin, Pike, Ethan, and about 15 others rode down into town while the rest spread out to guard the approaches. The horses' hooves made soft clopping sounds on the packed dirt, muffled and almost ghostly in the stillness. Ethan's heart was pounding now, each beat thundering in his ears. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. He scanned the rooftops as they rode past, looking for any sign of the townspeople, but saw nothing. Either they were well hidden or they'd lost their nerve and fled. He had to believe they were hidden, had to believe they'd hold. The column reached the bank and dismounted. Corbin posted 2 men at the front door, 2 at the back, and sent the rest inside with him. Ethan followed, his hand resting casually on his gun, his eyes taking in every detail. The interior of the bank was exactly as he'd left it the night before. Dark, empty, the vault looming at the far end like a monument to greed. Corbin walked straight to it, running his hands over the iron surface, testing the lock. "This is going to take some serious firepower," he said. Pike hefted a canvas bag he'd been carrying. "Got enough dynamite here to crack a mountain." "Good," Corbin said. "Set the charges, and make sure you use enough. I want that door blown clean off its hinges." Pike and two other men went to work, placing sticks of dynamite around the vault door and connecting them with the length of fuse cord. Ethan watched carefully, noting exactly where they positioned the charges, calculating the blast radius in his mind. While they worked, Corbin walked back to the front of the bank and looked out through the window at the street beyond. Still quiet out there. Almost too quiet. "Maybe we should post more guards," Pike suggested, glancing up from his work. Corbin shook his head. "We're fine. The town's dead. Nobody's coming." Ethan felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine despite the cool night air. He needed all of Corbin's men inside the bank, or at least close to it before he gave the signal. But right now they were scattered. Some outside, some in, some still on the perimeter. He cleared his throat. "You want me to check the back office? Make sure there's no surprises?" Corbin waved him off. "Go ahead." Ethan walked toward the back, but instead of going into the office, he positioned himself near one of the windows where he could see the street. From here, he had a clear view of the spots where the townspeople had planted their charges. 3 mounds of dirt barely visible in the darkness, positioned in a triangle around the front of the bank. Pike finished setting the dynamite on the vault and unwound the fuse, feeding it toward the front door. "All set, boss. Give me 2 minutes to light this and get clear, and that vault will be wide open." Corbin nodded. "Do it." Pike struck a match, the small flame bright in the darkness. He touched it to the fuse and it sparked to life, hissing and spitting as the flame raced along the cord toward the vault. "Everyone out!" Corbin shouted. The men poured out of the bank, spilling into the street. Pike was the last to emerge, grinning like a child on Christmas morning. 30 seconds! The men clustered together in front of the bank, watching the building, waiting for the explosion. Ethan counted them quickly. 15 men, all standing in almost exactly the spot he'd marked for the trap. Perfect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the red bandana, holding it low at his side where only someone watching from the rooftops could see it. He waited, counting down the seconds, timing it just right. 20 seconds until the vault exploded. 15 seconds until the trap sprang. Ethan raised the bandana and waved it once, a quick, sharp motion. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world erupted in fire and thunder. The 3 charges buried in the street detonated simultaneously. 3 massive explosions that sent dirt and rock and shattered wood flying in every direction. The concussive force slammed into Ethan like a physical blow, knocking him backward into the wall of the bank. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and for a moment he couldn't tell which way was up. But he was alive. He'd been standing just far enough back to avoid the worst of the blast. Corbin's men hadn't been so lucky. Bodies lay scattered across the street, some motionless, others writhing and screaming. The explosions had torn through their ranks like a scythe through wheat. Ethan counted at least 8 men down, maybe more, their bodies broken and bleeding. The survivors staggered to their feet, dazed and disoriented, reaching for their guns. Corbin was among them, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, his face twisted with rage. "Ambush!" he roared. "It's a trap!" That's when the rifles opened up. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops on both sides of the street. Mayor Green, Tom the blacksmith, Pete the barber, Jacob the gravedigger, and half a dozen others. They'd been hiding in the darkness, waiting for this exact moment. Now they poured lead down into the street, their shots cracking through the night air. More of Corbin's men fell, crying out in pain and shock. The ones still standing tried to return fire, but they were caught in a crossfire with no cover. It was a slaughter. Ethan drew his gun and fired at the nearest outlaw, a man he didn't recognize. The bullet caught him in the chest and he went down hard. Ethan moved forward, keeping low, using the chaos as cover. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw Logan Pike. The gunfighter was on his feet, blood running down his arm, his face contorted with fury. He spotted Ethan, and their eyes locked. Recognition flashed in Pike's expression, then understanding, then pure murderous rage. "You!" Pike snarled. "You set us up!" He raised his gun, but Ethan was faster. He fired twice, both shots hitting Pike's center mass. The gunfighter stumbled backward, his own gun discharging into the dirt, and collapsed against the side of a building. Ethan walked toward him, his gun still raised. Pike looked up at him, blood bubbling at his lips. "Who are you?" Pike gasped. Ethan's voice was cold and flat. "You killed my parents, burned my home. You don't even remember, do you?" Pike's eyes widened with realization. "The ranch in Montana." "That's right," Ethan said. He pulled the trigger one more time, and Logan Pike's eyes went empty. Around him, the battle was winding down. Most of Corbin's men were dead or dying. A few had managed to run, disappearing into the darkness. But the core of the gang, the men who'd terrorized this territory for years, lay broken in the dirt. Ethan turned, searching for Corbin. The outlaw leader was still alive, stumbling toward his horse, one arm hanging useless at his side. Ethan raised his gun to fire, but before he could pull the trigger, a voice rang out. "Stop!" Ethan turned to see Mayor Green climbing down from his rooftop perch, his rifle in hand. "Let him go." "What?" Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Green walked closer, his face pale but resolute. "We've killed enough men tonight. Let him run. Let him spread the word about what happens when outlaws come to Silver Ridge." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He killed my family." "I know," Green said quietly, "but if you kill him now, you'll never know the truth." "What truth?" Ethan demanded. Green pointed toward the edge of town where a figure stood in the shadows, watching. The man wore a long black coat and a flat-brimmed hat, the same man Ethan had seen near the church days earlier. "That man," Green said. "He arrived in town a week ago, called himself a traveling preacher, offered to help us, said he knew how to deal with men like Corbin. We didn't think much of it at the time, but after you showed up, I started noticing things. The way he watched you, the way he asked questions about the plan." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think that man knows more about Corbin's gang than he let on," Green said, "and I think you need to ask him why." Ethan looked back toward where the figure had been standing, but the man was gone, vanished into the darkness like smoke. In the confusion, Corbin had managed to mount his horse and was riding hard toward the edge of town. Ethan raised his gun, but the outlaw leader was already out of range, disappearing into the night. Ethan lowered his weapon, frustration and rage warring inside him. He'd come so close. So damn close. But Green was right about one thing. Something didn't add up. The mysterious preacher. The way Corbin's gang had known exactly when the gold shipment was arriving. The precision of their planned attack. This wasn't over. Not yet. Around him, the townspeople were emerging from their hiding places, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the bodies of their would-be attackers lying in the street. Some were cheering, others were crying. All of them looked like they couldn't quite believe they'd survived. Tom the blacksmith approached Ethan, his face grim. "You saved us." "Not yet," Ethan said. He pointed toward the north, where Corbin had fled. "Their leader's still alive, and I have a feeling there's more to this than just a gang of outlaws looking for an easy score." Pete walked over, wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. "What do you mean?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Jacob appeared, carrying a lantern. "We should search the bodies, see if we can find anything that tells us where Corbin might be headed." It was a good idea. Ethan nodded and joined the search, moving from body to body, checking pockets, looking for papers, maps, anything useful. Most of the dead men carried nothing but guns and ammunition. But when Ethan reached the body of one of the Butcher brothers, Clay, based on the scar across his nose, he found something interesting. A letter, folded and tucked into an inside coat pocket. Ethan unfolded it carefully, holding it up to Jacob's lantern light. The handwriting was neat and precise, almost scholarly. "The shipment arrives on the 15th, it read. 200,000 in gold as promised. The bank will be lightly guarded. Most of the town has already fled. This will be your easiest score yet. But remember our agreement. I get 20% of the take, delivered to the usual location. Fail me and you'll regret it. Succeed and there will be more opportunities in the future." The letter was signed with a single initial, V. But it wasn't Corbin's handwriting. Ethan was certain of that. This was someone else. Someone who'd been feeding information to the gang. Someone who'd helped plan this entire raid. "What is it?" Green asked, reading over Ethan's shoulder. Proof, Ethan said grimly. Proof that Corbin had help. Someone in this town, or near it, has been working with him. Green's face went pale. Who? Ethan thought about the mysterious preacher, about the way the man had watched him, about the way he disappeared the moment the fighting started. I have an idea, Ethan said, but I need to be sure. He folded the letter and tucked it into his own pocket, then turned to address the gathered townspeople. You all did well tonight. You stood and fought when most people would have run. Silver Ridge is safe because of you. The people murmured their thanks, but Ethan wasn't finished. But the fight's not over, he continued. Corbin's still out there. And whoever's been helping him is still out there too. I'm going after them, both of them, and I'm going to finish what we started here. Mayor Green stepped forward. You don't have to do this alone. We'll help you. Ethan shook his head. You've done enough. Your fight is over. Mine isn't. He walked back to where his horse was tied and swung into the saddle. The animal was skittish from the explosions and gunfire, but Ethan calmed it with a steady hand and soft words. Where will you go? Pete called out. Ethan looked north toward the dark hills where Corbin had fled, wherever the trail leads. And I won't stop until every man responsible for what happened to my family is dead. He touched his hat to the townspeople in farewell, then turned his horse and rode out of Silver Ridge. Behind him, the town was already beginning to clean up the aftermath, dragging bodies out of the street, putting out small fires, tending to the wounded. But Ethan's mind was already miles away, focused on the hunt. Corbin would be wounded, desperate, probably heading for some safe house or hideout he'd used before. He'd be easier to track now, easier to corner. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Corbin was just a piece of a larger puzzle. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had brought Corbin to Silver Ridge, knowing exactly when the gold would arrive, knowing exactly how to exploit the town's fear, and that someone was still out there. Ethan rode through the night, following the tracks Corbin's horse had left in the soft earth. The trail led north and east, winding through the hills toward rougher country. Several times Ethan lost the tracks and had to backtrack, searching by moonlight for hoofprints or broken branches that would tell him which way Corbin had gone. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan spotted smoke rising from a narrow canyon up ahead. He dismounted and approached on foot, leading his horse by the reins, moving as quietly as possible. The canyon was narrow and steep-walled, with a small stream running through the center. At the far end, tucked against the rock face, was a crude shelter made of branches and canvas. A fire burned in front of it, and beside the fire sat Victor Corbin. The outlaw leader looked worse than Ethan had expected. His face was pale, his left arm bound in a makeshift sling, blood seeping through the bandages. He was trying to heat water in a dented pot, his movements slow and pained. Ethan tied his horse to a scrub pine and drew his gun. He walked into the canyon slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. Corbin looked up at the sound. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Then Corbin laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I should have known. You're like a damn ghost, Hale. Won't stay dead. I'm not the one who's about to die, Ethan said, his gun steady. Corbin gestured with his good hand toward the fire. Sit down. Let's talk. We're done talking, Ethan said. Are we? Corbin leaned back against a rock, his face twisted with pain. Because I think you're missing the bigger picture here. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. What are you talking about? The preacher, Corbin said. The man in the black coat. You've seen him, haven't you? Ethan didn't respond, but his expression must have given him away. Corbin smiled grimly. Thought so. That man's been pulling our strings for months, maybe longer. He's the one who told us about the gold shipment. He's the one who gave us information on every bank, every ranch, every target we've hit for the past year. Why would he do that? Ethan demanded. Money, Corbin said simply. He takes a cut of everything we steal. But it's more than that. He's got plans. Big plans. And we're just the muscle he uses to make them happen. Ethan's mind raced. Who is he? I don't know his real name, Corbin admitted. We just call him the Reverend. He shows up, gives us information, takes his cut, and disappears. Never stays in one place long. Never leaves a trail. Where can I find him? Ethan asked. Corbin coughed, blood flecking his lips. That's the thing, Hale. You can't. He finds you. And when he does, Corbin's eyes hardened. Well, let's just say you better be ready, because that man is 10 times more dangerous than I ever was. Ethan stared at him, weighing the truth of his words. Corbin had no reason to lie now. He was dying, and he knew it. Why are you telling me this? Ethan asked. Corbin looked down at his ruined arm, then back up at Ethan. Because I'm tired. Tired of running, tired of killing, tired of being someone else's weapon. You want revenge? Fine, kill me. But don't stop there. Find the Reverend. End this for good. Ethan lowered his gun slightly. Where's the rest of your gang? The Butcher brothers. Where's Sam? Dead, Corbin said. Died 2 months ago in a shootout in Wyoming. You only killed Clay last night. So that was one less name on Ethan's list. But it didn't matter now. The real enemy was still out there. The Reverend, Ethan said. What does he look like? Corbin described him. Tall, thin, sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to see right through you. Everything matched the man Ethan had seen in Silver Ridge. Last I heard he was heading east, Corbin added, toward the mining camps in the Rockies, probably looking for his next mark. Ethan nodded slowly. He raised his gun again. Wait, Corbin said. One more thing. Your parents, I didn't give that order. I never ordered anyone to kill civilians unless they fought back. What Pike and the Butchers did, that was on them, not me. Ethan's jaw tightened. You led them. You're responsible. Maybe, Corbin said quietly, but I want you to know, I never wanted it to go that way. It doesn't matter, Ethan said. They're still dead. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the rock walls, fading slowly into silence. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring down at Corbin's body. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no closure, just a cold emptiness that settled over him like frost. 3 names down: Logan Pike, Clay Butcher, Victor Corbin. But the list wasn't finished. The Reverend was still out there. And now Ethan had a new mission. He turned and walked back to his horse, leaving Corbin's body where it lay. Let the scavengers have him. Let the land reclaim what was left. Ethan had a preacher to find. The trail east led Ethan through some of the harshest country he'd ever seen. He rode for 3 days straight, stopping only to rest his horse and catch a few hours of sleep when exhaustion threatened to pull him from the saddle. The land grew rougher as he climbed into the foothills of the Rockies, jagged peaks rising like broken teeth against the sky, narrow passes choked with loose rock, and cold mountain streams that ran swift and clear over beds of stone. He passed through abandoned mining camps where rusted equipment sat like monuments to broken dreams, and small settlements where hard-eyed men watched him ride by without offering greeting or challenge. These were places where questions weren't asked, and the law was whatever a man could enforce with his gun. Perfect territory for someone like the Reverend to operate. Ethan stopped in a town called Blackwater Creek, a ramshackle collection of buildings clinging to the side of a mountain. The main street was little more than a muddy track lined with saloons, brothels, and supply stores. Men stumbled drunk from doorways at all hours, and the sound of breaking glass and shouted curses was as common as birdsong. He tied his horse outside a saloon called the Lucky Strike and pushed through the doors. The interior was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. A piano player pounded out a cheerless tune in the corner, while men gambled and drank with the desperate intensity of people trying to forget where they were. Ethan walked to the bar and caught the bartender's attention, a scarred man with one milky eye and hands the size of dinner plates. "Whiskey," Ethan said. The bartender poured without comment and slid the glass across the stained wood. Ethan paid and took a sip, letting the burn settle in his chest before speaking again. "I'm looking for someone," he said quietly. "A man who calls himself a preacher. Tall, thin, wears a black coat. Might have passed through here in the last few days." The bartender's good eye fixed on Ethan with sudden interest. "You law?" "No." "Bounty hunter?" "No." "Then why are you looking for him?" "Personal business," Ethan said. The bartender studied him for a long moment, then leaned in close. "That man you're describing, he was here 2 days ago. Stayed one night at the boarding house up the street, paid in gold coin, which got people talking. Then he left early the next morning, heading toward Crimson Falls." "Crimson Falls?" Ethan repeated. Mining camp about 15 miles northeast of here, the bartender explained. Big silver strike there about 6 months ago. Place is crawling with prospectors and claim jumpers. Perfect spot for a man who don't want to be found. Ethan nodded his thanks and finished his whiskey. He was about to leave when the bartender spoke again. Word of advice, friend, you go poking around Crimson Falls asking questions about that preacher, you better watch your back. He's got friends there. Dangerous friends. I'll keep that in mind, Ethan said. He left the saloon and spent the night in a cheap room above the general store, his gun within arm's reach and his sleep shallow and troubled. In his dreams, he saw his parents' faces, heard their voices, felt the heat of the burning ranch. And through it all, the figure in the black coat watched from the shadows, smiling. At first light, Ethan was back in the saddle, riding northeast toward Crimson Falls. The trail climbed steadily, winding through pine forests and across rocky slopes where the wind cut like a knife. By midday, he could see smoke rising from the valley ahead, dozens of campfires and crude chimneys marking the location of the mining camp. Crimson Falls sprawled across both sides of a narrow canyon, a chaotic jumble of tents, shacks, and half-built structures connected by rope bridges and wooden walkways. The sound of pickaxes striking stone echoed off the canyon walls, mixed with shouted arguments, the bray of mules, and the constant rumble of ore carts rolling on wooden tracks. Ethan rode down into the camp slowly, his eyes scanning the crowds. There had to be 300 or 400 people here, maybe more, all of them chasing the same dream of striking it rich. Most would fail, some would die trying. A few would find just enough silver to keep them chained to this miserable place until their bodies gave out or the ore ran dry. He found a livery stable and paid to have his horse fed and watered, then made his way into the heart of the camp. The main thoroughfare was a river of mud churned up by thousands of boots and hooves. Wooden planks had been laid down as makeshift sidewalks, but they were slick and treacherous. Ethan stopped at a supply tent and bought some hardtack and dried beef, using the opportunity to talk with the merchant, a grizzled old man with a face like cracked leather. "You new here?" the merchant asked as he counted out Ethan's change. "Just arrived," Ethan confirmed. "Looking for work." The merchant snorted. "Ain't we all? Every claim worth having is already staked. You'll be lucky to find a spot that ain't played out." "I'm not here for silver," Ethan said. "I'm here looking for someone, a preacher. Tall man, black coat, came through here recently." The merchant's expression shifted, just a flicker, but Ethan caught it. Fear, or maybe wariness. "Don't know anyone like that," the man said quickly, too quickly. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You sure about that?" The merchant's eyes darted to the side, then back to Ethan. "Listen, friend, I don't know what your business is with that man, but my advice is to forget about it. Some people in this camp, they don't take kindly to strangers asking questions." "Where can I find him?" Ethan pressed. The merchant hesitated, then sighed. "There's a tent at the north end of camp, big one, white canvas. That's where the man you're looking for holds his sermons. But you didn't hear it from me." Ethan nodded and pocketed his supplies. "Much obliged." He made his way through the camp, pushing through crowds of miners and merchants, dodging ore carts and mule trains. The smell was overwhelming: sweat, smoke, animal waste, and the acrid tang of blasting powder. This was a place where desperation and greed mixed into something toxic. At the north end of camp, exactly as described, stood a large white tent. A wooden sign out front read, "Services every evening, all welcome." Ethan circled the tent carefully, noting the layout, the exits, the positions of nearby structures. Through the canvas walls, he could hear voices, a man speaking in low, measured tones, and several others responding with murmured agreement. A service was already in progress. Ethan found a position behind a stack of lumber where he could watch the tent's entrance without being seen. He settled in to wait, his hand resting on his gun, his mind running through scenarios. He didn't have to wait long. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, people began emerging from the tent. Miners, mostly, their faces tired and hopeful in equal measure. They dispersed into the camp, heading back to their claims or their evening meals. Finally, when the tent was nearly empty, the man Ethan had been hunting stepped out. The Reverend looked exactly as Corbin had described him, tall and thin, dressed in a black coat and flat-brimmed hat, his face sharp and angular. But what struck Ethan most were his eyes. Even from a distance, they seemed to gleam with an intelligence that was almost predatory. The Reverend spoke briefly with two men who'd lingered behind, rough-looking characters who seemed more like bodyguards than congregants. Then he turned and walked toward the eastern edge of camp, where the canyon narrowed and the structures thinned out. Ethan followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows, moving from cover to cover. The Reverend walked with the casual confidence of a man who owned the ground he walked on, never looking back, never showing concern. The path led to a small cabin set apart from the main camp, built into the canyon wall with a clear view of the surrounding area. A lantern burned its window, casting warm light into the growing darkness. The Reverend stepped inside and closed the door. Ethan waited, watching for signs of additional guards or lookouts. He counted at least two men positioned near the cabin, one smoking a cigarette by a woodpile, the other sitting on a stump whittling a piece of wood. Both were armed. This wasn't going to be easy. Ethan circled wide, climbing up the rocky slope above the cabin until he found a position that gave him a view through the window. From here, he could see the Reverend inside, sitting at a desk, writing something in a leather-bound journal by lamplight. For hours, Ethan waited and watched. The guards changed shifts twice. Other men came and went, delivering messages or packages, staying only briefly. Through it all, the Reverend remained at his desk, writing, reading, occasionally sipping from a glass of whiskey. Finally, well past midnight, the cabin went dark. Ethan waited another hour to be sure, then began his descent. He moved slowly, testing each foothold, making no sound. When he reached the ground, he crept toward the cabin, avoiding the guards' sight lines. The door was locked, but the window he'd been watching through was slightly ajar. Ethan eased it open inch by inch, wincing at every tiny creak, then pulled himself through and into the cabin. The interior was sparse but well kept. A bed in one corner, the desk with its scattered papers, a small stove, and shelves lined with books. The Reverend was in the bed, his breathing slow and regular. Ethan drew his gun and crossed the room silently. He pressed the barrel against the Reverend's temple. "Don't move," Ethan whispered. The Reverend's eyes opened immediately, alert and focused despite being woken from sleep. He didn't flinch, didn't gasp. He just lay there, perfectly calm. "Ethan Hale," the Reverend said softly. "I've been expecting you." Ethan's blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about you," the Reverend said. "Your parents, John and Mary, your ranch in Montana, the years you spent in the prison camp, the vow you made standing over their graves." He smiled slightly. "You're very predictable, Mr. Hale." "Sit up," Ethan ordered. Slowly. The Reverend complied, moving with deliberate care. In the dim light filtering through the window, Ethan could see him more clearly now. The sharp features, the calculating eyes, the slight smile that never quite reached them. "You orchestrated everything," Ethan said. "The raids, the murders, all of it. You used Corbin and his gang as your tools." "Tools that have outlived their usefulness, apparently," the Reverend said. "I assume Victor is dead?" "Yes." "And Logan Pike? The Butcher brothers?" "All dead." The Reverend nodded thoughtfully. "Impressive. You're more capable than I anticipated." "Why?" Ethan demanded. "Why orchestrate all that death and destruction? For money?" The Reverend laughed, a soft, cultured sound completely at odds with the violence he'd enabled. "Money is a means, Mr. Hale, not an end. The gold, the silver, the cattle, those were just resources to fund something much larger." "What?" "Power," the Reverend said simply. "Real power. The kind that comes from controlling the flow of wealth in this territory. Do you know how much gold and silver moves through these mountains every year? Millions of dollars. And most of it passes through the hands of corrupt bankers, greedy mine owners, and incompetent territorial governors." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming. "I'm building something better, a network of influence that spans from here to Denver, from Montana to New Mexico. Men who owe me favors. Men who fear me. Men who will do whatever I ask because they know the alternative is ruin." "You're insane," Ethan said. "Am I?" the Reverend countered. "Or am I the only sane man in a territory drowning in chaos? The law here is a joke. The government is absent or corrupt. Someone needs to bring order to the frontier. Why not me? By murdering innocent people? The Reverend's expression hardened. There are no innocent people, Mr. Hale. Only those who serve my purposes and those who stand in my way. Your parents, unfortunately, chose the latter. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. They were farmers. They had nothing to do with your schemes. They were obstacles, the Reverend said coldly. Their ranch sat on land I needed to acquire for a business partner. They refused to sell, so I had them removed. White-hot rage flooded through Ethan. His hand trembled with the urge to pull the trigger, to end this man's life right here and now. But something held him back, a nagging doubt. If you knew I was coming, Ethan said slowly, why are you still here? Why not run? The Reverend smiled. Because I wanted to meet you, Mr. Hale, face to face, man to man. You've proven yourself to be resourceful, determined, and utterly ruthless when necessary. Those are qualities I admire, qualities I can use. You're offering me a job? Ethan asked incredulously. Why not? The Reverend said. You've already done half the work for me. You've eliminated Corbin's gang, removed my most unreliable assets, and proven you can operate outside the law without hesitation. Join me, and I'll give you wealth, influence, and the means to reshape this territory however you see fit. I'd rather die, Ethan said. The Reverend sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. You see, Mr. Hale, that's the problem with men like you. You're so focused on revenge that you can't see the bigger picture. You can't see opportunity when it's staring you in the face. The only thing I see is a dead man, Ethan said. He started to pull the trigger, but in that instant, the Reverend moved. His hand shot out, knocking Ethan's gun to the side. The weapon discharged, the bullet punching into the wall. Before Ethan could react, the Reverend was on his feet, moving with a speed that belied his thin frame. They crashed together, grappling for control of the gun. The Reverend was stronger than he looked, his grip like iron. They staggered across the room, knocking over the desk, sending papers and books flying. Ethan drove his knee into the Reverend's ribs, heard the satisfying crunch of bone. The man grunted but didn't let go. Instead, he drove his forehead into Ethan's face, splitting his lip. Blood filled Ethan's mouth. He spat it out and twisted hard, trying to wrench his gun arm free. The Reverend held on, his face inches from Ethan's, his breath hot and ragged. You should have taken my offer, the Reverend hissed. Outside, Ethan heard shouting, the guards, alerted by the gunshot. They'd be here in seconds. Ethan made a desperate gamble. He released his grip on the gun, letting the Reverend think he'd won. The moment the pressure eased, Ethan drove his fist into the man's throat. The Reverend choked and stumbled backward, releasing the gun. Ethan snatched it up and fired twice. Both shots hit center mass. The Reverend collapsed against the wall, blood spreading across his white shirt. He looked down at the wounds, then up at Ethan, his expression one of genuine surprise. You actually did it, he gasped. The door burst open. 2 guards rushed in, guns drawn. Ethan spun and fired, dropping the first man instantly. The second got a shot off that whizzed past Ethan's ear before Ethan's return fire caught him in the shoulder. The guard went down screaming. Ethan turned back to the Reverend, who was sliding down the wall, leaving a red smear on the whitewashed wood. Where's the gold? Ethan demanded. All the money you stole. Where is it? The Reverend coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. You think I kept it here? Fool. Tell me, Ethan said. The Reverend's smile was a red-stained grimace. It's already gone. Distributed. Invested. Working for me even now. You've killed me, Mr. Hale, but my work will continue. Others will take my place. The network I built, it's bigger than one man. No, Ethan said firmly. It ends here. With you. He pressed the gun to the Reverend's forehead. The dying man's eyes met his. You'll never find peace. Even with us all dead, you'll never... Ethan pulled the trigger. Silence flooded the cabin, broken only by the ringing in Ethan's ears and his own ragged breathing. He stood there for a moment, staring down at the body, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle over him. It was finished. Pike, the butchers, Corbin, and now the Reverend. Everyone responsible for his parents' deaths was dead. But the Reverend's words echoed in his mind. You'll never find peace. Maybe he was right. Ethan holstered his gun and searched the cabin quickly. He found the journal the Reverend had been writing in and tucked it into his coat, evidence of the network, names, and locations that might help bring down whatever remained of the operation. Then he climbed back out through the window and disappeared into the darkness before more guards could arrive. He made his way back through Crimson Falls, moving quickly but not running, just another shadow among many. By the time he reached the livery stable, alarms were being raised, shouts of murder, calls for the camp's rough approximation of law enforcement. Ethan saddled his horse and rode out, heading south toward Silver Ridge. He rode hard through the night, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the mining camp. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in gold and crimson, Ethan finally allowed himself to slow down. He stopped at a stream to water his horse and sat on a rock, pulling out the Reverend's journal. The pages were filled with names, dates, transactions, a meticulous record of bribes paid, officials corrupted, crimes commissioned. Ethan recognized some of the names: bankers in Denver, sheriffs in territorial towns, even a few politicians. The Reverend had been telling the truth. His network was vast. But as Ethan read deeper, he found something else. Entries about the ranch in Montana, about his parents. John and Mary Hale refused to sell, one entry read. Corbin's gang will handle the removal. Regrettable, but necessary. The land must be acquired for the railroad spur deal. A railroad deal. His parents had been murdered over a railroad deal. Ethan closed the journal, his hands shaking. All of this death, all of this pain over money and land and power. It was senseless, meaningless. But at least it was over. He tucked the journal back into his coat and stood, looking east toward the rising sun. Silver Ridge was 3 days' ride. He'd return the journal to Mayor Green, let him decide what to do with the information inside. Maybe it would help bring down the rest of the Reverend's network. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, Ethan's part in this was done. He mounted his horse and rode on, the weight of the gun at his hip somehow lighter than it had been before. 3 days later, Ethan rode into Silver Ridge just as the sun was setting. The town had changed in the week since he'd left. The burned sections had been cleared away. New lumber had been stacked for rebuilding. People moved through the streets with purpose rather than fear. The town was healing. Ethan tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside. Mayor Green was there, along with Pete, Jacob, and Tom. They looked up as he entered, and their faces broke into smiles. "Hale!" Green called out. "You're back, did you?" "It's done," Ethan said simply. He pulled the journal from his coat and set it on the table. This belonged to the man who orchestrated everything. The raids, the murders, all of it. His name was the Reverend, and he's dead now, along with Corbin and the rest. The men gathered around the journal, flipping through the pages, their expressions growing darker as they read. "These names," Green said quietly. "Some of these are powerful men. Territorial officials, businessmen, lawmen." "I know," Ethan said. "What you do with that information is up to you. But the man who created that network is gone. The rest, that's for others to handle." Green looked up at him. "You're not staying?" Ethan shook his head. "I've done what I came here to do." Pete stood and extended his hand. "You saved this town, Hale. We owe you everything." Ethan shook his hand. "You saved yourselves. I just gave you a chance." Tom the blacksmith cleared his throat. "We took up a collection. From everyone in town. It's not much, but—" "Keep it," Ethan interrupted. "Use it to rebuild. I don't need it." "What will you do?" Jacob asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Move on, I suppose. Find something worth doing." He turned to leave, but Green called after him. "Hale, one more thing. We found something while cleaning up after the battle. Thought you might want it." He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and handed it to Ethan. Inside was the photograph of his parents, the one from their wedding day. Somehow, it had survived the burning of the ranch. Ethan stared down at their young, hopeful faces for a long moment. Then he tucked the photograph carefully into his coat pocket, next to his heart. "Thank you," he said quietly. He walked out of the saloon and stood in the street, looking around at the town he'd helped save. The people here would rebuild their lives, raise their children, grow old in relative peace. And they'd do it because a group of ordinary people had found the courage to stand and fight when everything told them to run. That was something worth remembering. Ethan untied his horse and swung into the saddle. As he rode toward the edge of town, he passed the small cemetery where his parents were buried. He stopped for a moment, looking at the two simple crosses. "It's done," he said aloud. "They're all gone. You can rest now." The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Ethan touched his hat in farewell, then turned his horse west toward the setting sun. The road west took Ethan through country he'd never seen before. He rode for days without destination, letting his horse choose the path while his mind wandered through memories both old and new. The weight that had pressed on his chest since the day he'd found his parents' graves had lifted, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Not peace. The Reverend had been right about that. But perhaps acceptance. Perhaps the simple knowledge that he'd done everything he could, settled every debt, answered every question. The revenge he'd sought was complete. And now he was left with the hardest question of all. What came next? He passed through small settlements where nobody knew his name or cared about his past. He worked odd jobs when he needed money, helping a rancher mend fences, loading freight wagons, even dealing cards in a saloon for a few nights. The work was honest and simple, and it filled his days with something other than rage. But at night, when he lay under the stars with his saddle for a pillow, the faces of the dead came to him. Not just the men he'd killed, Pike, Corbin, the Reverend, but his parents too. He'd see his mother smile, hear his father's laugh, remember the way the ranch had looked in the early morning light when frost covered the grass like diamonds. Those memories didn't hurt the way they used to. They'd softened somehow, become touchstones rather than wounds. Reminders of what he'd lost, yes, but also of what had been good before the fire. 2 weeks after leaving Silver Ridge, Ethan found himself in a town called Willow Creek, nestled in a valley between rolling hills covered in golden grass. It was late summer now, the air warm and thick with the scent of hay and wildflowers. The town was larger than Silver Ridge, but smaller than the mining camps. Maybe 200 people, with a main street lined with well-kept buildings and a white steeple rising from the church at the far end. Ethan stopped at the general store to buy supplies and found himself in conversation with the owner, a friendly man named Samuel who seemed genuinely interested in where Ethan had come from and where he was headed. "Just passing through," Ethan said, counting out coins for the hardtack and coffee beans. "That's what they all say," Samuel replied with a grin. "But this valley has a way of making folks want to stay. Good land here. Good people. We're always looking for hard workers if you're interested." Ethan shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I'm not looking to settle." Samuel shrugged. "Offer stands if you change your mind. We've got a dance tonight at the town hall if you're still around. Whole community turns out. Good food, good music. You'd be welcome." Ethan thanked him and left, intending to ride on before evening. But as he walked his horse down the main street, he noticed something that made him pause. A young woman was struggling with a wagon wheel that had come loose from its axle. She was maybe 25 with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and a dress covered in dust from the road. 2 small children, a boy and a girl, neither older than 6, stood nearby, watching with worried faces. Ethan hesitated. It wasn't his problem. He could just keep walking. But he didn't. He tied his horse to a post and walked over. "Need some help?" The woman looked up, surprised. "Oh, yes, actually. The wheel came off about a mile back and I've been trying to get it back on, but I can't lift it high enough." "Let me," Ethan said. He knelt beside the wagon and examined the problem. The wheel had simply slipped off the axle pin, probably due to a worn washer. Easy enough to fix if you had the strength to lift the wagon bed high enough to slide everything back into place. Ethan braced himself and lifted. The woman quickly guided the wheel onto the axle and hammered the pin back through. When it was secure, Ethan lowered the wagon and stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Thank you so much," the woman said, genuine relief in her voice. "I was starting to think we'd be stuck here all night." "Glad I could help," Ethan said. The little girl tugged on the woman's skirt. "Mama, is the man staying for the dance?" The woman smiled. "I don't think you should come," the boy interrupted, his eyes bright with the earnest enthusiasm of childhood. "There's going to be pie." Ethan found himself smiling despite himself. "Is that so?" "Apple pie," the boy said solemnly, "and cherry. Mrs. Henderson makes the best cherry pie in the whole territory." The woman laughed. "Thomas, I'm sure this gentleman has places to be." But as Ethan looked at the 3 of them, this small family just trying to make their way home, he realized he didn't actually have anywhere to be. For the first time in months, maybe years, his time was his own. "Maybe I'll stop by," he said. The woman's smile widened. "I'm Anna, by the way. Anna Foster. These are my children, Thomas and Sarah." "Ethan Hale," he replied, touching his hat. "Well, Mr. Hale, we'd be pleased to see you tonight if you decide to come." As evening fell, Ethan found himself walking toward the town hall, drawn by the sound of fiddle music and laughter. He'd cleaned up as best he could, brushed the worst of the trail dust from his clothes, and even shaved for the first time in weeks. Inside, the hall was packed with people of all ages. Tables lined the walls, laden with food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables, and yes, several pies. In the center of the room, couples danced while a small band played lively music. Children ran between the adults, their shrieks of joy piercing through the general din. Ethan stood near the doorway, feeling suddenly out of place. These were good people, community people, the kind who'd built lives based on trust and cooperation. He was a killer, a man who'd spent the last few months hunting other men like animals. He was about to leave when Anna spotted him. "Mr. Hale!" She waved him over, her children in tow. "You came!" "Just for a little while," Ethan said. "Have you eaten? You must try the food. And Thomas was very insistent that you try Mrs. Henderson's cherry pie." Thomas nodded vigorously, already holding a plate with an enormous slice. "It's the best!" Anna guided Ethan to the food tables, introducing him to what seemed like half the town along the way. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, asking questions about where he'd come from and what brought him to Willow Creek. Ethan kept his answers vague but polite, not wanting to lie but not ready to tell the truth either. As the evening wore on, he found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in a very long time. The music was cheerful, the food was good, and the simple normalcy of it all, the gossip and laughter and children playing, felt like stepping into a different world. At one point, Samuel from the general store approached with an older man in tow. "Ethan, this is Mayor Briggs. He wanted to meet you." The mayor was a sturdy man with silver hair and a firm handshake. "Samuel tells me you're good with your hands. We're always looking for skilled workers. Got a sawmill operation that could use another man." "I'm not looking to stay," Ethan said, the words automatic. "I understand," Briggs said, "but the offer's there if you change your mind. We're a growing community. Lots of opportunities for a man willing to work hard and build something." Build something. The words echoed in Ethan's mind long after the mayor had moved on to greet other guests. What had he built in his life? The ranch was gone. His family was gone. He'd spent months tearing things down, destroying Corbin's gang, dismantling the Reverend's network. But what had he created? Nothing. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Anna approaching until she spoke. "You look troubled, Mr. Hale." Ethan glanced at her. "Just thinking." "About staying?" she asked perceptively. "About what comes next," Ethan said. "I've spent so long focused on one thing that now it's done, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." Anna nodded slowly. "My husband died 2 years ago. Fever took him in the winter. For months after, I felt the same way. Like I was just drifting. Going through the motions of living without really knowing why." "What changed?" Ethan asked. She smiled and gestured toward her children, who were playing with a group of other kids near the bandstand. "Them. They needed me. They needed a future, so I started building one day at a time." "It's not the same," Ethan said quietly. "You had something to build for." "Everyone has something to build for," Anna countered. "Sometimes you just have to look for it." Before Ethan could respond, the music shifted to a slower tune. Couples moved onto the dance floor, swaying together. Anna looked at him expectantly. "Would you dance with me, Mr. Hale?" Ethan hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Anna said with a laugh. "But that's never stopped anyone here." He found himself taking her hand and walking onto the floor. They moved awkwardly at first, Ethan's steps uncertain after so many years without dancing. But Anna was patient and kind, and gradually he found the rhythm. As they swayed to the music, Ethan realized something. This felt good, normal, human. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a life waiting for him beyond revenge and violence. The dance ended and Anna stepped back, her cheeks flushed. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Ethan, he said. Just Ethan. She smiled. Thank you, Ethan. The evening wound down slowly. Families gathered their children and headed home. The band packed up their instruments. The food was cleared away and the hall began to empty. Ethan helped stack chairs and sweep the floor, falling into the easy camaraderie of community work. It reminded him of barn raisings on his parents' ranch, when neighbors would come together to help each other build something bigger than any one person could manage alone. When the work was done, Ethan walked Anna and her children back to their small house on the edge of town. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. At her door, Anna turned to him. Thank you again for your help today, both with the wagon and, well, everything. It was my pleasure, Ethan said, and meant it. Sarah tugged on his sleeve. Will you come visit us again? Ethan looked down at the little girl's hopeful face, then at Anna, who was watching him with quiet understanding in her eyes. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe I will. He walked back toward the boarding house where he'd taken a room, his mind churning. Every instinct told him to leave, to keep moving, to avoid getting attached to people or places. Attachment meant vulnerability. It meant having something to lose. But he'd already lost everything. What did he have left to fear? The next morning, Ethan found Mayor Briggs at the town office. I'd like to hear more about that sawmill job, Ethan said. Briggs's face lit up. Excellent. Let me show you the operation. They walked to the edge of town where a fast-flowing creek powered a water wheel that drove the saw bowl blades. The mill was well maintained, the wood stacked in neat piles, everything organized and efficient. We're expanding, Briggs explained. Building new houses, a school, even talking about a proper hotel. We need good lumber, and we need it fast. Pay is fair, and we provide housing for workers. Ethan studied the operation, his practiced eye assessing the work. It was honest labor, hard labor, the kind that would leave him tired at the end of each day, but satisfied in a way that violence never could. I'll take it, he said. Wonderful. Briggs extended his hand. Welcome to Willow Creek, Ethan. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. Ethan woke before dawn, worked at the sawmill until the sun set, then returned to his small cabin tired and sore, but oddly content. The work was physical and demanding, requiring focus and precision. It left little room for dark thoughts or memories of the men he'd killed. He saw Anna and her children regularly. Sometimes he'd stop by in the evening to help with repairs around her house, fixing a leaky roof, mending a broken fence, chopping wood for the winter. Thomas and Sarah would follow him around, asking endless questions and chattering about their days at school. Anna never pressed him about his past, never asked where he'd come from or what he'd done. She seemed to understand that he needed time and space to figure out who he was now, beyond the grief and rage that had defined him for so long. One evening, about a month after he'd arrived, Ethan was sitting on Anna's porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold when she brought out 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. You've been good for them, she said quietly, nodding toward the house where the children were getting ready for bed. Thomas especially. He needs a man's influence, someone to look up to. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, Ethan said. Why not? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he told her. Not everything. He spared her the worst details, but enough. About his parents, the ranch, the men he'd hunted down. About the violence and the vengeance and the emptiness that had followed. When he finished, Anna was quiet. Ethan braced himself for judgment, for fear, for her to ask him to leave and never come back. Instead, she reached over and took his hand. We all carry scars, she said softly. The question is whether we let them define us, or whether we choose to become something more. I want to be something more, Ethan admitted. I'm just not sure I know how. Then learn, Anna said simply. One day at a time, just like the rest of us. That night, walking back to his cabin under a sky full of stars, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd carried for so long, the burden of grief and rage and unfinished business, was finally, truly gone. His parents were at peace. The men who'd killed them were dead. The Reverend's network was being dismantled by territorial authorities who'd acted on the information in the journal. Justice, such as it was, had been served. Now, it was time to live. The seasons changed. Summer faded into autumn, the hills turning gold and crimson. Ethan worked at the sawmill, his body growing stronger, his hands becoming calloused in new ways. He became part of this community, helping with barn raisings, attending town meetings, even teaching young Thomas how to use tools properly. He and Anna grew closer, their friendship deepening into something more. They moved slowly, carefully, both of them carrying wounds that needed time to heal. But gradually, inevitably, they found comfort in each other's company. One evening in late October, as the first frost touched the valley, Ethan stood at the edge of his property, a small plot of land he'd purchased with his savings from the sawmill, and looked out at the hills. He thought about his parents, about the ranch they'd built with their own hands, about the life they'd carved out of the harsh frontier. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, through war and prison and loss and vengeance. And he thought about the future, about the house he was planning to build on this land, about Anna and her children, about roots growing deep into soil that had once seemed barren. The past couldn't be changed, the dead couldn't be brought back, but the future was still unwritten. Ethan took a deep breath of the cold, clear air and smiled. Somewhere behind him, he heard children's laughter, Thomas and Sarah playing in the yard. Anna called them in for supper, her voice warm and full of life. Ethan turned away from the hills and walked toward that light, toward that laughter, toward a future he was finally ready to build. The road that had brought him here had been long and dark and stained with blood. But it was over now. Ahead lay only the open frontier full of possibility and promise. And for the first time since the war, Ethan Hale was ready to live again. Winter came to Willow Creek with a gentle hand, dusting the valley in white and turning the creek into a ribbon of ice. Ethan built his house slowly, carefully, with the same precision he'd once used to plan ambushes and track killers. But this time, his hands built something instead of destroying it. Anna's children helped when they could, Thomas carrying boards and Sarah organizing nails into neat piles. Anna herself would come by in the afternoons with hot coffee and sandwiches, staying to watch the progress. "It's coming along beautifully," she said one day, standing in what would eventually be the main room. "It's not much," Ethan said, "but it's solid." "It's a home," Anna corrected gently. "That's more than most people have." On Christmas Eve, the house was finished enough to be livable. Ethan moved his few belongings in and stood in the empty room, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps he'd need to seal before the deep cold arrived. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Anna stood outside with Thomas and Sarah, all three of them bundled against the cold. "We brought you a housewarming gift," Anna said, holding out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a quilt, beautifully stitched with patterns of stars and mountains. "Anna, I can't—" "You can and you will," she said firmly. "Every home needs a quilt, and every person deserves to feel welcomed." Thomas stepped forward shyly. "We helped make it. I picked the blue fabric. And I helped with the stitching," Sarah added proudly. Ethan knelt down to their level. "Thank you, both of you. It's the finest gift anyone's ever given me." Later, after the children had gone to bed and Anna had stayed to help him hang the quilt over the bed frame, they sat by the fireplace drinking coffee. "I never thought I'd have this," Ethan said quietly. "A home. People who care. A future worth looking forward to." "What changed?" Anna asked. Ethan thought about it. "I did. Or maybe I finally let myself become what I was supposed to be all along." Anna smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I," Ethan said. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the valley in white. The frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and dangerous and beautiful. But here, in this small house, in this small town, Ethan Hale had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not revenge, not justice, not even peace exactly, just a life worth living. And that, he realized, was enough. When spring came, Ethan married Anna in a simple ceremony at the church. The whole town turned out to celebrate, filling the hall with music and laughter and the kind of joy that only comes from a community that takes care of its own. As Ethan stood beside Anna, her hand in his, he looked out at the faces gathered around them. Samuel, the shopkeeper, Mayor Briggs, Tom from the sawmill, families he'd come to know and care about. These people had given him something he thought he'd lost forever, a place to belong. Thomas and Sarah stood beside them, grinning from ear to ear. Ethan had asked them both if they'd mind if he married their mother, and their enthusiastic agreement had meant more to him than he could put into words. They were a family now. Not bound by blood, but by choice, by love. As the ceremony ended and the celebration began, Ethan caught sight of something through the window. A lone rider on the road leading out of town, heading west. For just a moment, Ethan felt the old pull. The urge to mount up and ride, to keep moving, to stay ahead of the past. But then Anna squeezed his hand, and Thomas tugged on his sleeve asking when they could have cake, and Sarah was already dragging him toward the dance floor. Ethan let the moment pass. He turned away from the window, away from the road, away from the man he used to be. The frontier would always be there, wild and endless and calling to those restless enough to answer. But Ethan Hale had finally come home. Years later, when his hair had gone gray and his hands were gnarled from decades of honest work, Ethan would sometimes sit on his porch in the evening and watch the sun set over the hills. Thomas had grown into a fine young man, running the sawmill now with his own family. Sarah had married a rancher and lived just over the ridge with her husband and 3 children. Anna would sit beside him in the rocking chair he'd built for her 20th anniversary, their hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of companionship. Sometimes visitors would come through Willow Creek and hear stories about the town's early days, about the lone gunman who'd drifted in one summer and decided to stay, about how he'd helped build the sawmill, the school, the church, about how he'd become one of the founding pillars of the community. They never mentioned where he'd come from or what he'd done before. That part of the story had been buried along with the men who'd made it necessary. All that mattered was what he'd become: a husband, a father, a friend, a builder, a man at peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan squeezed Anna's hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "How far I've come. How lucky I am to be here." "We're the lucky ones," Anna said. "You chose to stay. You chose us." "Best choice I ever made," Ethan replied. The last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to appear one by one until the heavens were filled with them. Somewhere out there, the frontier still stretched wild and untamed, calling to those who hadn't found their place yet. But Ethan Hale had found his, and he was home.